We've been dealing with a pandemic for a year, but another epidemic has plagued our community for much longer. Family violence affects everyone. On Health Matters, we'll find out why and what's being done to fix the problem.
We all, if we band together, can lead the journey to decrease and eliminate domestic violence in our communities.
Plus, how Providence is turning a terrible tragedy into a way to help victims of domestic abuse. Violence at home, right now on Health Matters.
Health Matters is made possible with the support of WSU Health Sciences Spokane, WSU College of Medicine, and by Providence Healthcare.
You get to give the opportunity to go to that grandchild's soccer game, to go to the daughter's wedding. It's just amazing. I mean, that to be able to be part of a team that allows someone to have an entire life back is phenomenal.
Good evening. Welcome to Health Matters. I'm Teresa Lukens. The incidence of family violence in Spokane is the highest in the state. Recent information from the Spokane Public Health District shows that law enforcement receives over 14,000 domestic violence calls every year. 25% of all criminal cases in Spokane involve domestic violence, and more than 2,000 children are victims of abuse or witness abuse each year, which is why, through an expansive community assessment, Priority Spokane identified the reduction of trauma and violence as the #1 priority for Spokane County. Ryan Ulrich is the Executive Director of Priority Spokane and a Culture of Health Fellow with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. Priority Spokane is a nonprofit organization made up of 25 organizations that collaboratively identify and address priorities for Spokane County. Also here is Joe Ader. He is the Executive Director of Family Promise of Spokane. Family Promise is a nonprofit that works to equip families to end homelessness by providing rental assistance, shelter, and resources. And Dr. Scott Ferguson is Executive Director at Embrace Washington. Embrace Washington is a nonprofit organization committed to providing, caring, and supporting children in foster care within our community. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. And Ryan, we want to begin with you and come to an assessment of how Priority Spokane came to the conclusion that family trauma and violence was the #1 concern in our community.
Absolutely, Teresa. So Priority Spokane brings together stakeholders to conduct a community assessment every 3 to 5 years. So it was in 2019 that we finished up our last community assessment, where we brought together leaders from business, from local nonprofits, from government, from schools, a variety of different fields that came together, looked at data, and ultimately voted on what they felt were the biggest issues facing Spokane County. And what especially stood out this last time during the assessment was our above average child abuse rates, domestic violence rates, and also our soaring youth suicide and self-harm rates. All of those we felt really had lots of negative impacts on our public health, on our economy, and so the reduction of trauma and violence was identified as that priority.
And when you look at the list of organizations and businesses that are involved, it's really widespread, very broad representation of businesses and organizations.
It really is. We have representation from our 2 major hospital chains, from the city of Spokane, the county, to some of our local universities, nonprofits, our utility, Avista Utilities. All these different organizations come together to help support this community assessment process.
And we'll talk more about why they're concerned and the impact it's having on the community and how we get to the point where we can fix that. In talking to you, Ryan, when we were putting the show together, I was surprised when you recommended Joe and Dr. Ferguson for this program, because it wasn't in the scope of how I was approaching domestic violence or family trauma. Joe, Family Promise is an organization that helps homeless families get to a place where they have shelter and services. So how do you fit into the picture when we start talking about trauma?
Sure, absolutely. Well, when we talk about trauma and homelessness, there's a direct connection between the two. So just about every single one of our adults that we have in our shelters has experienced some type of childhood trauma. And then homelessness itself is a trauma for the children that we have in our shelters. And so we experience this very frequently. And then I also get asked all the time about what's the cause of homelessness. And I've often, told, okay, well, it's drug use, it's mental health, it's all of these things. But really, that gateway drug to homelessness and all of these other things is childhood trauma. We see rates of over 85% for our homeless population that experience trauma as children. So there is a direct line connection between childhood trauma and homelessness in our community.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Ferguson, the foster care system, not only has it been impacted during COVID, but overall you see quite a bit of trauma within the foster care system.
Correct. Yes, we note very similarly to Joe's overview that it is apparent that each child that is in the foster care system that we have served has experienced some form of trauma. We have seen higher rates than ever before of children that experience trauma on a wide variety of ranges, from neglect all the way to physical and sexual abuse. This trauma, and is importantly noted for these individuals, is that being simply placed into the care system is a form of trauma. And these children and youth that go into the care system notably have this experience, and additionally other forms of trauma that recycle and repeat themselves over and over. So we see and have seen this increase over and over for our population as well.
So Ryan, it sounds like a prevailing message here really is starting with the kids and finding services and correcting the problem when it comes to kids and violence.
Absolutely, Teresa. Really appreciate what Joe and Dr. Ferguson have shared, that when we looked at priorities for Spokane County, how we can best address some of the trauma and violence issues that we have. It absolutely is swimming upstream, assuring that children have safe, healthy environments to grow up in, trying to prevent that trauma from happening in the first place.
And it really trickles down into our school system, it touches a lot of our lives, and that's why as a community, we should be concerned.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And what's being done at this point, Ryan, with the organizations to address this? And right now is a tricky time. You have before COVID and after COVID. What was being done prior to the pandemic, and how have you had to change the approach?
We knew that we had significant problems with trauma and violence before COVID, and that COVID has only exacerbated those issues. Priority Spokane has worked with area researchers. We partnered with the Spokane Health District to actually conduct a trauma and violence map for Spokane County that helps us explain why we have the problems that we do. So from that research, from that data, we've actually developed a plan to expand peer support as a best practice to help address some of the issues that we're facing. We also are implementing a COVID stress and trauma education program, groups that can be conducted virtually over 6 weeks. We are in the process of deploying those across Spokane County. And then the third thing that Priority Spokane is focused on is also providing a free tutoring service in partnership with Gonzaga for K through 12 students, recognizing that if we can put capable volunteers in front of a camera that can come alongside kids that are struggling with education, that just are struggling with the confusion and the chaos that has resulted as part of this pandemic, we can do a lot of good. So these tutors are primarily local college students. We've trained them. They're friendly faces that are providing encouraging words that also are connected to other resources. So they're also seeing on those TV screens as they are tutoring kids other needs that they're able to meet by connecting families to a local food bank or to a utility assistance program. So those are the three areas in which we're responding.
So Joe, I would guess that Family Promise is tapping into some of those resources. Talk about the process when you identify a family that needs help and then may be complicated by violence in the home or trauma. How do you approach that? What's the process?
Sure. We often will see families, what we say is we see them on their worst day, right? So the day that they become homeless with children is the day that they walk in our doors, or when they've run out of all other resources. They come through our doors. And so often there is just an overall level of insecurity throughout all the families, and fear. And so I think the first thing that we do is we provide a level of security and safety. Just, hey, this is a comfortable place. The shelter is actually designed around a trauma-informed model. So when you walk in there, you can see everywhere in the space. You can see that your kids will be safe. The kids can see that there's a safe place for them to play. And we walk the families through that. So providing that safety level is kind of the first thing there. And then just letting families breathe out for a day to get used to it. And then we start meeting with them to, okay, how do we move forward from here? And through that and through, I mean, we're with families 24/7, 365. We see what the family dynamic is and what they are going through, and have really open conversations with our families about things that are areas of concern, and also just about, what they want for themselves and for their families, and then try to direct them to resources, some of the resources that Ryan mentioned, as well as the other, mental health resources that we have in our community, to try to provide for those while we work on, okay, let's get you back into housing and then get you stabilized there, which is another aspect of just being able to have security and for the future.
What kind of difference can that make, starting with the root cause and for the next generation to come out of that family?
I mean, that makes all the difference in the world. Right now, the street homeless that we are dealing with today is probably what we didn't do as a community 10 and 15 years ago. So if we want this to be different in the future, it starts with these children, and it starts with reducing the rates of childhood trauma and providing resources to those kids that have experienced that, as well as for the adults that have experienced it and now are raising families of their own with the models that they had when they were growing up. So it's replacing those models that we had as growing up with a new model that's more stable, more safe, and more sustainable for our community for the long term.
And Dr. Ferguson, foster kids can often fall through the cracks. Before COVID, we had a shortage of foster families. After COVID, even more pronounced?
That's correct. That trend is still a very strong and evident component that we consider daily. One way that we responded to such need of current placements for our youth in care, we have exponentially provided almost 200 beds for local families who licensed foster families, just so they can expand their capacity to provide more care for youth that they know they can take, but just need the resources. And that's where Embrace really shines, is being able to identify the family's need, partner with them, and then identify how can we continue to find innovative and creative solutions so that each youth in care does have an opportunity to change their trajectory, to think differently about themselves, knowing that they do have several challenges to overcome. But I think this is one way that we have responded and continue to see these youth in care find homes that are safe, that provide them opportunities of care and sustainable care over time.
Explain to us why, as a community, we should be concerned about the foster system.
Well, that's a good question. I think my initial response to that is that sometimes systems can be tricky. And I think one important element is that it takes a team effort to navigate a complex system. And this is something that we work at our organization to really collaboratively work with our representatives from the Washington Department of Children, Youth, and Families, the foster families themselves, and try to get a holistic picture of what those solutions need to look like. There's never a one-stop shop solution when you have such a dramatic need for placements for youth who are going into the care system and then need an avenue of safety in return. These are areas that we are considering right now about being strategic in building our capacity to ensure that they do have homes waiting for them, that we're empowering the foster families to have the capacity to bring on this much needed resource. And also working with our government officials as well to think strategically about how we can do better in the future.
And a lot of these kids are coming out of extremely abusive situations. So when we talk about trauma, the foster care system really paints a picture about what we're seeing and how that can affect the overall health of our community.
Correct. Yes, absolutely. In these particular dire areas when students go into care, they're 7 times more likely to experience depression, 6 times more likely to exhibit behavioral problems, 5 times more likely to feel anxiety. These are just some of the high areas of need that we see as youth go into the care system. And specifically in Eastern Washington, in our area of reach, we look at 13 counties and 1,400 youth that are in the care system and what those needs and those ongoing opportunities look like. And that is where we are constantly working to think of those solutions in the future.
And speaking of solutions, so Ryan, we've identified the problem. It is a very big problem. And in fact, how long does family trauma and violence stay a priority? Is it until, or do you put a cap on that?
Sure, Teresa. So we focus on a priority for 3 to 5 years. And we are looking at this, how big this one is, and it looks like we'll definitely spend the bulk of 5 years focused on this. But we choose that time frame because it assures that we are highly motivated to move the needle and to get the job done. We look at past research, and if it takes us any longer than that, we recognize that folks lose interest. And so we want to make sure we know this is a huge issue for Spokane County. We want to make sure that we are taking steps to address it, to assure that families have the resources and the support they need. So 3 to 5 years.
So we know there are community organizations and businesses involved. They're taking steps. How can the rest of us move this forward and actually make some headway in correcting the problem?
Well, I can think of there's a variety of ways that you can volunteer. We are implementing a COVID stress and trauma education program where individuals can be trained to actually lead virtual groups to help folks understand how trauma impacts us, and recognizing that like it or not, COVID has caused a lot of trauma. It's put us all under a lot of stress. So we want to make sure that folks across Spokane County have the tools to understand how to take care of themselves, how to take care of their families. So they can visit our website, priorityspokane.org, to register for one of those trainings. We need more volunteer tutors. I know that Joe and Scott, I'll turn this question over to you of how folks can participate with your organizations. But I think it really takes everybody stepping up, educating themselves on the impact that trauma has, and then educating themselves also on what tools and research are there to help us as a community heal and help us move forward.
And Joe, can you address what Family Promise needs and how we can help out your organization?
Sure. So we are still navigating COVID, of course, and we will probably for several more months. But right now we are working on plans for virtual mentoring. And so that will be something that will be coming moving forward. And so if anybody would like to be interested in or like to be involved in that, they can connect with us on our website. There's many areas to volunteer. I think one of the big things, though, for anybody that's watching this or listening to this that has experienced childhood trauma, it's not a life sentence. It doesn't have to be. And so I think recognizing that and recognizing these negative outcomes, they can be worked through, and you could work through it and get on the other side of it. I think what we see most of the time is adults that haven't had the resources to work through it. And so they are dealing with it as an adult the same way that we would deal with it as a children. And our defense mechanisms as children are not defense mechanisms as adults. They disarm ourselves and dismantle our ability to deal with everyday situations. And it's the same defense mechanism. So whether that's I'm going to isolate myself, or I'm going to fight, or whatever those defense mechanisms are that allowed us to survive childhood, are the same ones that prevent us from thriving in adulthood. And so I think reaching out to others for those that are experiencing this, and reaching out for mental health support is a big thing, and a thing that is stigmatized in our community still. And I think it needs to be unstigmatized, because we all need help. So just want to encourage those to reach out, and those that have been through it to reach out to help others.
And if I know of a family that I think needs help, what's the best way to approach either the family, or do I come directly to an organization like Family Promise? What should I do?
Yeah, so if they are experiencing homelessness, I think directing them towards us, it's best if they make the choice to do that. Directing them towards us is a way to do that. Now, if they're experiencing trauma and dealing with the impacts of that, there's some great mental health resources in our community that I would reach out to rather than us. We'll focus on the homelessness side of things, but I would reach out to some of the others, like Ryan mentioned, for mental health resources.
And Dr. Ferguson, how can we help Embrace Spokane during this really difficult time?
Absolutely. Well, I would just like to reiterate and thank Joe for his input, because I agree. I think we work hard to ensure that we acknowledge that there is trauma to be addressed with every student. We think intentionally that they are not alone, and we communicate that to everyone who's a part of our network. And so we think strategically about how we encourage the child in care, the parents who are a part of their experience, and the social worker as well. We think strategically about how we can engage all of the team in the foster system and community around the students, and think about helping them to bring to light what not only, again, the current trauma, but other traumas, past traumas, and being able to work through those, and realizing that it's a marathon and not a sprint. It's super important to realize that we encourage the journey of healing, and that's a really important path that we encourage here at Embrace. One foster parent shared with me an interesting quote that I thought was helpful in describing how to get connected. And they said, the one thing they learned from being a parent of traumatized children is that those children are amazing, they are resilient, and they are strong. And this is one ethic that we continue to think about in helping the community get engaged with Embrace Washington. A couple of ways that they can do that is our WISH program. On our website, we have opportunities where we are able to learn the needs of the youth in care, and then match the community with those needs, and having opportunities for folks to financially support, or maybe it's a tangible particular item that the youth needs, such as a weighted blanket to keep safe and feel safe during counseling sessions. There's a variety of ways and needs that they can connect with our WISH opportunity. Secondarily, we have a fantastic educational tutoring program that we encourage the community to consider financially sponsoring our foster youth who are partnering with Sylvan Learning Center, working with certified and trained teachers, teachers who've been trained using the ACEs trauma-informed care practice and curriculum to ensure that they can do and instruct each student they work with to the best of their ability. So those are just a couple ways that we encourage the community to partner with us, because we know we can make a positive difference. Every youth that we work with is worth it.
For those people that may be inspired to want to find out more information about being a foster family, what do they need to know up front, Dr. Ferguson, before they take that journey?
Absolutely. One is that we at our organization love to connect folks with that process. The nice, I think, one really convenient opportunity is that learning more about how to become a licensed foster family is now completely online. It's an online process, and there are several individuals who can help folks who are interested or feel that calling to become a foster family to learn more about that experience. But I think one really important fact to consider is that this is a journey, that the opportunity of becoming a licensed foster family is a great opportunity, but it comes with great responsibility. And that goes back to what I think Ryan mentioned, which is constantly learning, being willing to learn how to become effective foster parents to youth who have this kind of traumatic experience. And how can they best learn how to be that parent and show that care, love, and support. So at our website at www.embracewa.org, we have directions, and we can help facilitate anyone who's ever interested in becoming a licensed foster family, and we highly encourage it. We would love to chat with you and give more information as needed.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. All of it very important, going towards having a healthier community. I want to thank you for being here to talk more about this. And you can find out more information on Priority Spokane, Family Promise of Spokane, and Embrace Washington on the Health Matters page at ksps.org. Providence Health Spokane treats hundreds of victims of domestic violence each year. But when they lost one of their own to domestic abuse, they knew they had to do more within their own ranks.
Patty's Place is making lemonade out of lemons.
It would be impossible for Peg Curry to know all of her thousands of coworkers at Providence Health, but she knew Patty Hernandez.
So many people knew her, and she was bubbly and smart and very unique and just lifted everybody up every day. So when we lost Patty to this terrible tragedy, we knew we needed to do more.
Hernandez was found dead in April of 2019 inside a Spokane apartment she shared with boyfriend Joseph Scheel, the man who stabbed her multiple times.
Domestic violence is such a problem in our community. We have one of the highest domestic violence rates in the state.
Patty's murder shocked those who knew her, and it was only after her death that friends and coworkers discovered the depth of the abuse she had been enduring. Scheel had attacked and hurt Hernandez several times prior to the fatal day. Curry believes it was Patty's kind heart that kept her from leaving.
So we thought, as a way to honor Patty, we would put together a resource site that had an area for education about, if you're a victim, what do you do? And how do you access that? It's an online resource kit. We call it Patty's Place. And it's the safe zone for people to get information about how to deal with domestic violence situations.
Patty's Place is just the beginning for Providence.
With the assistance of the Domestic Violence Coalition and the YWCA, we put together a toolkit that's available to businesses across the county so they can use these valuable resources to educate their own staff about what is it, how do we prevent it, how do we recognize it, and if it's happening, how do we deal with it?
And Curry is confident that Spokane can turn things around.
Our community can make a difference, and it's having the conviction to educate your broader employee group about domestic violence, about the resources, to provide time, treasure, and talent to these organizations that are trying to defeat this. We all, if we band together, can lead the journey to decrease and eliminate domestic violence in our communities.
If you need help, call one of the numbers on your screen. If you're in immediate danger, call 911. You'll also find these numbers and other information on the Health Matters page at ksps.org. Joining me now is Annie Murphy, Executive Director of the Spokane Regional Domestic Violence Coalition. Annie has worked in the Spokane community for over 13 years, seeing patterns of trauma in both adults and children. The Spokane Regional Domestic Violence Coalition was formed to ensure a unified approach of eliminating domestic violence in our community. Sergeant Jordan Ferguson is the supervisor of the Spokane Police Department Domestic Violence Unit. The SPD DV unit utilizes focused deterrence, victim empowerment, and temporary removal of firearms from volatile situations. And Tiara Leonard is a licensed mental health counselor and director of communications for A Refuge, Trauma-Informed Therapies, where they provide affordable counseling and education that promotes safe exploration of current struggles and past trauma. And thank you all for being here today. And Annie, I want to start with you, coming off that story that we just saw about Providence losing a beloved employee to domestic abuse, a horrendous crime. But the way they reacted, is that something, by putting in place resources for employees, is that something you'd like to see other employers do?
Absolutely. I think a lot of times when we have violence in our community, a lot of people look to one another and say, what do we do? How do we handle this issue? And so I really applaud Providence and the proactive approach that they've taken in saying, we're not just going to sit idly by and let this issue continue in our community. We're going to be proactive in supporting our employees. So absolutely, we would love to see that be replicated in multiple business settings in our community.
And in fact, they're even now reaching beyond their own employees by helping other businesses with toolkits. Explain a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so we're really honored to be a grant recipient of Providence Community Foundation following Patty's murder, and really leadership from Peg Curry in recognizing that this issue needs to be addressed head on. After they successfully provided employee assistance to their employees, they said, what would it look like if we really did this across our community? So with this grant opportunity, we're able to partner with the YWCA Spokane and replicate a similar model to multiple businesses across our community. And inside of that, we're going to partner with GSI, Spokane Valley Chamber. We're looking to partner with Big Table and the businesses that they serve, as well as the Hispanic Business Association, really just trying to reach multiple different business venues in our community so that everyone has the opportunity to support their employees in the same way.
Sergeant Ferguson, talk about the work that your unit does in stopping domestic violence. It's not just about reacting to calls, it's a much bigger picture.
Yeah, we definitely believe in empowering the victims. Part of what we do is we try to contact every reported victim of a domestic violence call for service in the previous 24 hours. With that, and then our officers are talking with the defendants before they go to court, advising them of the seriousness of domestic violence and explaining what the court procedure is going to be. And we want them to be informed before they go to court so that they have an idea of what they need to do and what they should be doing to avoid being a repeat offender. And with that, we're also doing the research for the courts on the possibility of firearms being involved, because the mix of firearms and domestic violence is just a deadly combination that we're trying to avoid.
And Tiara, I want to talk a little bit about your work as well and what a refuge does and how you work with clients regarding violence and trauma in the family.
Yes, absolutely. Trauma and violence in the family is almost the core of what we attend to at trauma-informed therapies, whether it be a recent experience for somebody, a child or even an adult coming in to talk about what's going on, or historical trauma, something that happened 20, 25, 30 plus years ago that's still bothering somebody, because the way that trauma works is that we don't just get over it. When we experience trauma in the household via abuse, neglect, verbal or physical assault, we're going to hang on to these trauma events in our minds, in our bodies, and continue to experience the symptoms of them far into our adult years until we attend to them and resolve them.
And Annie, when we talk about domestic violence, in fact, that's sort of too narrow of a view. We really want to talk about family violence and how it affects children and families, because Spokane has the highest incidence of domestic violence and family trauma in the entire state of Washington. So we indeed have to address this problem and start to correct it. So, you know, we are now looking at this issue as a bigger problem than just partner-to-partner violence.
Absolutely. So we have some agencies that serve intimate partner survivors in our community, like the YWCA, and then we also have Lutheran Community Services that serve other crime victims, as well as sexual assault victims. And so oftentimes we think of domestic violence as a dating or a marriage relationship. But for us in our work with the coalition, we've really developed a broad definition in recognizing that it is intimate partner violence. It's also sexual assault. It's also trafficking. It's also also child abuse, and really encompasses all of that type of violence. Even elder abuse, we have pretty high as well as rising rates of elder abuse in our community, and that's also something we need to talk about as we have people inside of the baby boomer generation, right, aging into this next life stage. We also need to think about their safety as well. So it can look different for every person, for every family, but there is a lot of different types of violence that people are experiencing in our community. Absolutely.
And Sergeant Ferguson, these can be the most dangerous calls that law enforcement walk into. They're extremely volatile. Talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, a domestic violence perpetrator is probably the greatest single threat to a law enforcement officer. And that's part of what we're focusing on, is getting the information so that other officers are aware, trying to temporarily remove the firearms at that point, and then also protecting the children that are witnessing. I believe it's somewhere near 85% of all children that are in a home with domestic violence actually see the violence happen. And this affects them for the rest of their lives and has so many negative outcomes that I'm sure you could take probably, some of the bad areas of the downtown and some of the crises that are going on there and attribute that to the adverse childhood experiences they witnessed.
They're walking into dangerous situations, so they have to protect themselves. They have to become psychologist and police officer all at the same time, and then be concerned about children in the home. What type of special training do the officers in your unit have?
Everyone in our unit, we keep schooled up what we call forensic experiential trauma interviewing, FETI, understanding how trauma in the brain works, understanding that you cannot talk to a victim like you're talking to the victim of a bank robbery or something. Their brain doesn't process things the same way. And then we pass along that information to our patrol officers and try to keep them updated and trained, because, in the grand scheme of things, nobody really wants us there until they need us there. Nobody wants an officer walking into the middle of your room or your house. But when the danger is so much or the abuse is so much, they will forego that privacy to have an officer step in. So yeah, we're prepared for hostility from the perpetrator. There's other witnesses that may not want us there. Even the victim may not want us there. We have to be prepared for all outcomes.
And Tiara, you talked a little bit about the long-term effects. Can you expand on that? When you have a client come to you for counseling, where do you even begin to tackle the problem and get them whole again?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are so many different ways that trauma shows up in the mind and the body. PTSD is probably the disorder that we're most familiar with, publicly speaking. And of course, we have these visions of what PTSD might look like, anger or difficulty sleeping, being withdrawn from friends and family. And that's certainly true. But what's surprising to a lot of people is that trauma can also show up in a myriad of different ways, such as depression, anxiety, phobias, just a general inability to feel at ease in the mind and the body. So folks might be walking around with unresolved trauma, having no idea that that's really what it is that's causing their symptoms, because perhaps they didn't experience an event that would lead to a formal PTSD diagnosis. But nonetheless, these trauma symptoms are still impairing their ability to really thrive and function in the ways that they desire to.
Mm-hmm. So where do you begin? How do you get them healed? Are you ever whole again, or is it just something you're continually dealing with?
Oh, of course. It's always the true belief that I have with all of the clients that I see, that healing and wholeness is absolutely reachable and manageable for all humans that come into my office. I was so glad to hear Sergeant Ferguson talk about ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. This is a really good place to start. When I have a client come into my office, we do the ACEs inventory right off the bat. And it's so interesting to see what is in the ACEs inventory, because it speaks about not only witnessing abuse or being physically abused, but also being neglected, feeling unsafe, feeling unloved or worthless in one's family system. There's so much that goes into creating an environment of trauma and unsafety for a child. It's not simply physical violence that creates that. So to start there, to get a good amount of background into what someone experienced in their childhood is typically where I start with all of my clients.
And Annie, so often this goes on behind closed doors. Neighbors, family may not know. And now we have a pandemic that has complicated matters even more. So how are we getting help to people that need it? How are we even able to recognize it at this point?
That has really been our concern since March of 2020 when schools first closed. What will happen to all of these children in our community that no one is seeing day in and day out? And as the pandemic has continued and that schools have continued to be closed, we've just had to become really strategic as well as really well organized in how we communicate information and how we get information. So all of our schools, as well as counselors, are mandatory reporters. They're watching, when they're doing Zoom calls with students and with families. Counselors continue to check in with kids individually in multiple different ways. We've also put out over 110,000 flyers inside of the city of Spokane with resources on them via city utility bills. We put out over 35,000 flyers with meal distribution inside of school lunches and with Second Harvest, recognizing that people are not moving through our community in the same way. And so when law enforcement responds, when medical providers are seeing people inside of doctors' offices and hospitals, those are some of the only eyes and ears that we have on vulnerable people right now. So people just need to be that much more aware, as well as other essential workers, right? If you work in a grocery store or a pharmacy, if you see people coming in and things just don't look right, things don't feel right, trust your gut, trust your instinct, and maybe try to check in with that person. And we also encourage all of our community members to have resources available, have resources posted in the bathroom or in windows so that if people need to access resources, then they're able to. It's also really important to note that 911 is still working. First responders will come into your home still. Also in our community, we're lucky that we have a text ability, so you can text 911. So if safety is a concern, you do also have that ability.
And Sergeant Ferguson, are you seeing more calls right now? I know working in news, it seems like I'm hearing more and more about more violent attacks in the home. Is that the case?
Yeah, we saw a large increase starting in about the May-June time frame, where we actually went up close to 30% in the number of calls for service. And we've started getting that back down. So we're back down to where we were in January last year with that. But there was a while there where we had a huge increase going. And if I could add on to what Annie was saying, the other really fascinating thing in our community is something called Handle with Care. And Annie's one of the spearheads on this with the regional health district. But now when an officer goes into a home and there's a child in the home, just by checking a box on a form, the health district gets notified and a school district gets notified. So there's an extra set of eyes watching that child if they need help, if there's behavioral problem, if there's scholastic problem. I mean, it's something you just don't see hardly anywhere else in the country, and it's representative of the collaboration that we have going on in the Spokane community.
Annie, are we seeing people use that resource?
Yes, so we were really excited. So we initially launched Handle with Care with Spokane Public Schools. There's approximately 35,000 students inside of Spokane Public Schools, but with the concern over this time of COVID, we actually were able to secure some funding via our county commissioners and expand that. And we're looking at partnering with all of our school districts in Spokane County, so approximately 13 school districts across the county. And so working with our outlying police jurisdictions, law enforcement jurisdictions like the Sheriff's Department, Liberty Lake, Cheney Police Department, et cetera, Airway Heights. And we do see calls coming in where officers are responding to homes. And I think it's important to notice, kind of piggybacking on what was mentioned earlier, is that trauma looks different for every kiddo. It looks different for every family. And so it's not always just domestic violence that kids are witnessing at home or experiencing at home, but those traumatic incidences can have lasting impressions. And so with Handle with Care, we are very strategic in saying it's not just domestic violence, it's other types of trauma too. It's overdose, it's significant mental health crises inside of the home. It's other sorts of really scary, if you will, situations that law enforcement is showing up to. And so when kids go to school the next day or get on their calls the next day with their schools, we want those teachers and counselors to be able to wrap around those kids and just be trauma responsive and trauma informed in how they deal with students. It's really, really important for that child's whole life trajectory, as we heard earlier as well.
And Annie, are there enough services then to get kids into programs or to find them the help that they need once those have been identified?
I was a counselor for many years. I would say there's always a need for more counseling. There's always a need for more support and services for students. One of the things that we really hope with tracking our data and with these types of programs is that we're then able to expand and get more services for more districts and get more services for students. We have a need for more substance use disorder counselors for youth, for more mental health counselors for youth. We just see those needs continuing, especially during this time of COVID. There's some great statewide data from Department of Health that has been really helpful in predicting increases in mental health, substance use disorders, as well as suicide. So we really do need to be checking in with our young people as well as our adults and making sure that they have access to services.
Kiera, talk about the window of tolerance and how that's been affected by COVID-19.
Absolutely. So the window of tolerance is a way that we speak about the reaction to trauma in the mind and the body. If we are thinking about this kind of as a column, the middle part of that column is called our window of tolerance. And when we're occupying our window of tolerance, we're feeling at ease in our minds and our bodies, free of stress, functioning the way that we want to function, connecting with other humans the way we want to connect, feeling healthy and well. Above the window of tolerance is the hyperarousal zone. And in the hyperarousal zone, we're feeling angry, irritable, we're quick to react. This is also known as a fight or flight response. And then down below the window of tolerance, we're in the hypoarousal zone. We are feeling zoned out, spacey, fatigued, and depressed in those areas. So we're going to see, and this is also known as the freeze response, if we're talking from a trauma lens. So during these experiences of trauma, and COVID is a really good example of this, it's so important that we are able to access our window of tolerance, that we're doing what's necessary to stay grounded in our minds and our bodies, to take care of ourselves, to attend to ourselves through all sorts of aspects of wellness in order to avoid becoming permanently traumatized, avoid becoming victims of PTSD or another trauma disorder. But during COVID, all of us are experiencing not only this group trauma event, this collective trauma event, but also so many of us are stuck. We're stuck at our homes. We might be stuck in a home that has domestic violence or has chronic health issues or has neglect or general unhappiness. If we're stuck in that space and trying to maintain our window of tolerance, we're going to find this so much more difficult than if we're able to access these spaces that so many of us use, especially kiddos, to find health and wellness in our life, such as schools, such as our friends' houses or the houses of our mentors. So it's so important to take into mind that all of our windows of tolerances are decreased at the moment because of this broad trauma event that we're all experiencing collectively. And therefore, we're highly more likely to experience a hyperarousal state, becoming angry, becoming overreactive, not using our rational thinking set, responding in ways that otherwise we wouldn't, or our hypoarousal zone, becoming depressed, becoming lethargic.
And that's when people may end up lashing out in ways maybe they wouldn't otherwise, or in some cases even taking it to the next level.
Exactly right.
So let's talk about some of the things that can be done. It's a lot to unpack, but Sergeant Ferguson, where does the buck stop? How do we, is it with the judicial system? How do we fix this?
Good question, and that's part of what we're doing with our focused deterrence model. And when we talk to the defendants, it's one of the most effective ways to reduce domestic violence. And we also communicating with the courts and giving them the information, because the judicial system, the courts can't do anything if they're not given the information. And so we're working extra hard to make sure they have the information. But it's your 5-year plan, your 10-year plan, your 20-year plan. We need to stop exposing kids to the violence. We need to get kids help that are traumatized by this violence, and so they are not going to be the ones more likely to be a victim or be a perpetrator in the future. So, in economics, we have our 6-month bailout that we can work on, but we also have our 20-year plan to make sure we have our retirement savings built up at the same time. So it's going to be a community collaboration, and I think we're really off to the right foot in Spokane.
Is there anything the community can do, if I'm sitting at home watching this now, that could help?
The see something, say something. I'll never forget a domestic violence homicide a couple of years ago, and we had absolutely no calls for service. We had no history with law enforcement in this couple. And one of the media outlets went and interviewed the neighbors, and the neighbor said, "Yeah, I always knew something was going on in that house." And there's no way anybody can help. And we're not saying call, law enforcement every single time, but, get on the Regional Domestic Violence Coalition website and look for the resources page on that. Find places you can call in for a friend to the advocates. Talking to an advocate. The YWCA here just did a great 1.5-hour long class on Domestic Violence 101. And there was a great matrix of things to say when somebody tells you they're involved in domestic violence. And it's not, well, are you sure this is really happening? It's being supportive and accepting. But that was a great eye opener for a lot of people, just to know what to say, know how to say something, how to respond when somebody tells you are. So believe a person. When a person says they're a victim of something, start off by believing. In our line of work, if we went to a bank robbery and the teller said, "Yeah, we just been robbed," the officer's not going to say, "Are you sure?" We have to do the same thing with our domestic violence victims and other victims of violence. Is start off by believing and then do our investigation from there.
And Annie, what's next for the coalition as far as moving this forward and making some headway?
Man, yeah, we have our work cut out for us in this community, but that's all right. We're up to the task. I think, kind of like Sergeant Ferguson mentioned, we're coming at this issue in multiple ways, right? So if people are looking for help and healing, then we encourage them to reach out for their own personal counseling, whether that's because you've experienced violence or you're perpetrating violence inside of your relationship. That's really important too, that we recognize that we do have options for men in our community to get healing as well, men or women that are perpetrating violence. We are really working at how we can support kids in preventative ways, working with our school districts, like we mentioned, working with other partners. And then we're also really focused on accountability, right? Making sure that people are held accountable for their actions. And so partnering with our courts and with our law enforcement partners and saying, this isn't acceptable to us in our community any longer. We really need to make change. And then I think the last piece that we're going to be really working on in the next few months is the work with Providence around the business toolkit. And so starting to get more education and awareness out to different sectors in our community and looking at how we all can play a part in this work. So reaching out again, like we said, to new partners and saying, hey, be our partner in this, right? Help all the people that are inside of your network, and then go to another network and then help the people in that network. So we're excited about this work, and we're just looking forward.
A lot of work to be done, but a lot of good work also being done. I want to thank all three of you for being here tonight. And if you are watching and need help, call the Domestic Violence Hotline, Safe Passages Hotline in North Idaho, or the National Hotline for Domestic Violence. If you're in immediate danger, call 911. You'll also find some helpful links on the Health Matters page at ksps.org. And be sure to join us on February 18th when we look at homelessness in the Inland Northwest and the efforts to provide services and affordable housing. And that will do it for this edition of Health Matters. Until next time, I'm Teresa Lukens. Stay safe and good night.
Health Matters is made possible with the support of WSU Health Sciences Spokane, WSU College of Medicine, and by Providence Healthcare.
The healthcare team was an extension of your family. They were more than just service providers. They actually feel what you feel. They don't just treat you, they sort of live with you. It was as though they were especially assigned to me.